I'll see you guys in the dark.
So this started about a month after I turned 19, and I just recently turned 20. And this is still going on. About a year ago, my mom got the opportunity to open up a small store. The location of this place is inside of like a multi-purpose building. The building is actually a former asylum that's been reconstructed into a thriving little location. But this isn't a ghost story. My mom's store is like an indoors farmer market. We're at the end of the building. There's only one room after us, and that room is a small cafe. When we first started up this store, we had a lot of friendly customers that would come in and out. My mom would bring in her baked goods and canned goods and sell them. About a week in, there was one man that stood out to me. I had seen him in the building before, but never in our part of it. He was usually in the consignment shop or in the arts room. But one day, he finally came in. My first impression of him was immediately negative. He walked across the room towards me and my mom, and he called over, "Ah, there's a girl with crazy hair over here," talking about me and my, at the time, bright pink hair. Now, I get that my hair can be a conversation starter, but it's one thing to give me a compliment about it, and another thing to call it crazy from across the room when I don't even know you. We learned that his name was Stanley. He was an older gentleman, about 60. He had shabby gray hair, pretty tall, and a constant dull expression on his face, even when he smiled and laughed. On the way home that day, I told my mom that he was obnoxious and annoying, and that I didn't quite care for him, but we both ended up shrugging it off. No big deal, right? The next time he came in, he once again rubbed me the wrong way, but also gave me the silent creeps. He was wandering around and kept looking over to where my mom and I sat behind the counters. My mom informed me that she was going to go to the next room to order us some lunch. As soon as she left, Stanley came walking over. "There's the girl with the crazy hair," he laughed. "It's still pretty crazy, huh?" I laughed it off as he tried hitting up a conversation with me. He made me pretty uncomfortable. Eventually, my mom came back in. He turned the conversation on my mother. It stayed pretty casual. He bought something, then left. I told my mom how aggravated he made me. He eventually started coming in all the time. Each time, it was the same thing. "I see the girl with the crazy hair. Your hair is still a crazy color." After a while, I just stopped responding to him, and my mom would take the conversation into her hands. He started asking me random things, if I was single or if I smoked. It made me angry. I barely knew the guy, and it was none of his business. Eventually, my mom recruited other vendors to sell stuff. The other vendors rarely came in. We always just sold old stuff to them. My mom's friends started sitting with us during the day and helping us with things. Her name was Meredith. Eventually, I began sitting far back behind the counter where the cash register was if I saw Stanley come in. I would leave it up to Meredith and my mom to deal with him. I even began putting my earphones in. I would never actually turn my music on, though. I pretended to. But really, I listened as Stanley tried hitting up conversations with me. I wanted to know what he was saying. I would ignore him and act as if I didn't even see him. "She always has those earphones in," I heard him chuckle to my mom and Meredith one day. No shit, I thought to myself. Then my stomach turned one day as I heard him say something else to my mom. "She's a very cute girl. How old is she?" "She's 19, my mom told him. I was angry that my mom would even answer that question. It was none of this dude's business. Then, of course, he went on about my hair again, which at that point was purple. The thing that began making me angry was that he would always comment on my hair. But one thing is, Meredith also had purple hair. She always had her hair dyed purple, but he never said anything about it to her. It was always just my hair. I found that pretty odd. One day while I was driving us home, I noticed that my check engine light was on. I told my mom, and we had my older brother look at it when he got home from work that night. He told us that he checked everything, and nothing seemed wrong. Then out of curiosity, he checked my gas cover. It was gone. Somebody stole my gas cap. I immediately told my mom that I bet it was Stanley. I don't know why he would have done it, but he always parked next to my car when he came, and he had been there that day. We told Stanley about it, and he didn't have much to say, which made me even more suspicious. Of course, we have no solid proof that it was him. My mom is required by the state to put her name, address, and phone number on all of the food products that she makes and sells, just in case a customer needed to contact her. Which means, of course, Stanley had all that info. He began calling our house. Yes, we still have a house phone. And the first few times he would call and tell my mom things like, "Your bread was a little dry," or "I tried your relish, it was a little bland," things like that. Then one day, my mom totally freaked me out. She said that Stanley had called and was asking questions about me. She didn't really say what kind of questions, but she also said that he was saying that I was a very pretty girl and all that crap. He never once mentioned my mom's food. The conversation apparently stayed on me. One of my friends that does the store with her, Jean, is certified to take care of mentally handicapped and disabled people. She takes care of a girl named Christy. Christy is about 30. She can walk and talk, but has the mentality of a young child. Jean would bring her into the store sometimes with her. Stanley once again called my house and began telling my mom how Christy was a very pretty girl and that she had a wonderful smile and that kind of stuff. It creeped my mom out, and she immediately called Jean and told her to make sure Christy was never left alone while in that building. This kind of garbage continued happening. Eventually, the cafe next to us was switched out with a different owner. The new owner, Tiffany, was a 30-year-old married mother of 3 young kids. One day, we were in talking to her since it was a slow day. My mom looked out the window and said, "Ah, crap, Stanley's here," as his old blue van pulled into the parking lot. Yes, the creep drives a van. The creep drives a van. Tiffany sort of laughed and said, "You guys don't like him either?" We told her no, and that I found him very creepy. Tiffany informed us that he lived on the same street as her. She said that she couldn't stand the creep. She told us how he would drive by her house slowly sometimes and peer into her windows to see if she was in their kitchen. Every time he saw her, he would make comments like, "There's that pretty tiny thing," or "There's the pretty young thing." I began telling her about all the weird stuff he said and done to us, and she told me to stay away from him. Meredith's husband rents rooms in the same building, and he sells his paintings out of. He told us one day that Stanley would always go to his room first before venturing down to our end of the building. He told my mom that he would always ask if my mom and I were there, and if he said no, then Stanley would just leave. If he said yes, then Stanley would begin asking questions about me. He also told us that there was a few occasions that he found Stanley standing outside of the studio window, just staring in at him. Then he would realize he was caught. He would just smile and wave before going inside. Things began getting worse. We informed the owner of the building, and he told us not to be rude to him because it was bad for her business. Thanks, lady. Stanley began doing strange things, like informing my mom that he still had food from her that he bought months before. My mom would tell him not to eat it, and that it was probably no good by now. He would always just laugh. He brought in a dish made from those little Christmas mints that my mom had made, and that he had bought in December. It was like April at the time, and it was still all broken. He told my mom that he dropped it and asked if he could have a refund. My mom said no, and that he shouldn't even still have it. It had to have been stale. He even recently went as far as crumpling up one of my mom's cookies in front of us, then asking for a refund because the cookie was nothing but crumbs. One day I was forced to run the register since it was just my mom and I at the store, and she didn't know how to run it. Stanley had come in and was talking to my mom. I had my phone sitting on the counter next to me. Yes, I know that seems non-professional, but the store isn't really a professional store anyways. It's very laid back in that sense. But anyways, I never lock my phone, and Stanley had seen my background. Then out of the blue he asked, "Can I see your pictures?" I looked up at him and just kind of blinked. I wasn't sure what he meant. He gestured to my phone and asked again. I was super taken back by this request. He was asking to go through the pictures of my phone. My mom, of course, didn't say or do anything to help me. So, I held my phone up and briefly showed him my background picture, which thankfully wasn't anything personal. My background was a picture of 5 seconds of summer, the 4 band members standing in like a hallway. He frowned when he saw what it was and asked if it was a picture of my friends. Keeping it short and sweet, I said no. Then he asked if I knew them. I said no, it was just a band that I listened to. Thinking back on it, I should have told him that yes, I knew them, and maybe it should have steered him away a bit, thinking that I had 4 close, large guy friends. The next day, it was once again just my mom and I. Stanley, of course, showed up. As he was walking towards me, he saw me jokingly said, "Who's the strange girl sitting over there?" My mom, trying to joke back, said, "It's a hitchhiker I picked up." Then Stanley nodded and said, "Yeah, I'd pick her up too." It creeped me the fuck out. Later that day, I was telling Tiffany about it while we ordered lunch. She told me that if he gives me a hard time like that, I was more than welcome to go and sit in the kitchen with her until he leaves. I told my dad that night about Stanley. He decided that he was going to come to our store with my mom and I the next day. He wanted to meet this guy. The next day, my dad was introduced to Stanley. Stanley asked my dad if he knew me. My dad said, "That's my daughter." And Stanley nervously chuckled. Then he tried asking my dad about work and stuff. My dad wasn't having any of it. He gave him short answers to everything and acted very uninterested. Finally, Stanley caught on that my dad didn't care for him too much. "Are you staying all day?" Stanley finally asked him. My dad told him yes. Stanley kind of grunted in disapproval. My dad asked me to show him around the building since it was actually his first time being there, and Stanley slowly began following us, trying to see if my dad was actually staying all day. My dad and I went outside for a little while and stood by my dad's truck. We pretended to look at the new grill he had just bought. But really, my dad was waiting for Stanley to leave so that he could leave as well. Stanley stood by us and tried talking to my dad some more. He again asked if he was staying, and my dad said yes. That was the most Dad would say to him, though. Finally, Stanley got frustrated and said, "All right, well, bye," and then left. Thank God for Tiffany. Every time she sees Stanley in the building, she comes in and asks if she can have my help with something in the kitchen, like moving boxes or something. I always tell her yes. There's of course no boxes for me to actually move. She just says that so that I can go and get away from him. The most recent time this happened, Stanley saw me go into the kitchen. He stood by the cafe counter and tried talking to Tiffany and her hired help, Darcy. "Where's all the young girls in there?" I heard him ask. Darcy spoke up, being a mother of 2 young kids as well, and said, "Sorry, no young girls here." "There's not a young girl?" he asked her. Darcy is in her late 20s. Darcy shook her head and frowned, then responded with a no. I was standing in that kitchen for about an hour while Stanley was out talking to my mom and Meredith. Once he was gone, my mom informed me that he was asking where I was. My mom told him that I was helping Tiffany and Darcy in the kitchen, and Stanley responded with a, "Oh, I knew I saw her out there somewhere." This next thing is a story from Tiffany. She told me that her son, who was in his 6th grade, was riding his bike with another boy, and their female friend was walking a bit behind them. They were going by Stanley's house, and Stanley went outside. He said something to the girl like, "Oh, you don't have a bike?" Then he offered her a ride, even though she was with her friends. It freaked the girl and Tiffany's son out. Tiffany's son knew how much of a creep Stanley was since he creeped by their house a lot. And he has witnessed the way Stanley looks and talks to me. Her son even told her that he saw Stanley looking me up and down one day, which does not make me happy. On another occasion, Stanley was telling us that he used to be certified to take care of people with disabilities, just like Gene was. But he got his license for that taken away one day for having a girl at his house. He told us that he tried to have her hide her car so people didn't know she was there, but Stanley's girlfriend called the cops and reported him in. My mom couldn't understand why having a girl at his house would have that kind of a consequence. I told my mom that it had to have been something illegal, like maybe a prostitute or maybe an underage girl. Our store is in the middle of a bunch of apartment buildings, and there's a small road that loops around all of the buildings. Well, just yesterday, I was bored out of my mind, and right across the road in the cemetery, there were Pokestops and a gym for Pokemon Go. So I decided to go for a walk to hatch my eggs, hit up the Pokestops, and catch some Pokemon. I was walking the loops, and I looked up for a second to see Stanley's stupid blue van driving around the loop, heading towards the store. I put my head back down, and he drove right past me. He didn't even slow down, so I sighed with relief and kept walking. He apparently didn't see me. He was still in the building when I returned, but was in the cafe bothering Tiffany. My mom pulled me aside and told me that Stanley walked up to her and said, "So, your daughter doesn't get into people's cars?" I told my mom that he didn't even stop and offer, but my mom was still freaked out that was even in his mind. It has me pretty freaked out too. And just now, my mom told me that she just found a message from Tiffany that said, "Oh my fucking God, no matter where I go, I can't get away from Stanley. I went to the store and he parked right next to me." Obviously, this is all still happening. I don't know that we can actually call the cops since he hasn't attempted anything, but I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. I wish I never had met him again, but we're going to my mom's store tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll be seeing Stanley yet again. It all started in a grocery store aisle with an encounter between 13, at the most, me, and an older man that looked to be in his mid-50s or early 60s. My father decided that he needed some groceries in order to make dinner for myself and my siblings that night. So there we were at the local supermarket, walking down one aisle after the other. A tidbit about me that's integral to this story. I'm the sort of person that will see something in a store and immediately just stop in my tracks to determine whether I want it or not. I just so happened to do this very thing on that day, but it was normal to my father because I always did this at the grocery store, and we were in a small enough place, and a familiar one at that he didn't mind if I went to go look at magazines or ran off to grab a particular snack that I wanted. I cannot remember for the life of me what I had gone off in search for on this particular day, but I do remember standing in an empty aisle eyeing the food on the top shelf. All of a sudden, I felt a presence to my right, so I look up and noticed an older man standing a little too close for me for comfort. I didn't say anything because my personal bubble is fairly large, and I tend to try and block out people I don't know due to social anxiety, so I took a couple steps to my left. At this point, my "get the heck out of here" voice is screaming to me because the moment I took those steps, the man moved in the same direction too. There was just something about his presence that made child me want to run and hide somewhere. The problem is, I was raised to almost respect our elders and follow the rules, always trumped my own insecurities. I stayed put, hoping to just come to a conclusion on what I wanted soon and grab it so that I could walk away respectfully. Meanwhile, I'm just thinking, please don't let him talk to me. It was repeating in my head over and over again. But he did end up speaking to me. I may not remember why I was in that aisle, but I won't ever forget the words he said to me. I don't know if he realized that I felt uncomfortable, or if he had just been mulling over what to say, but he chuckled a bit and said, "Hey now, no need to get upset. There's plenty of room here for the two of us." I fake laughed because it was the only thing I could think of or to do in response. At this point, he took it upon himself to turn towards me and point up at the top shelf. "You need me to get that down for you?" I nodded because it was the easiest, in my mind, way to get this guy to leave me alone. He grabbed whatever food or snack it was off the top shelf and handed it to me. But when my hand made contact with the container, he didn't let go. I pulled it in my direction, thinking maybe he just forgot to let go. But he still didn't loosen his grip, and basically every alarm bell in my head went off. I tried thinking of every way I could exit the situation that wouldn't get me into trouble, but none of them seemed plausible, so I just froze. He started to comment on how he loved my style, my nail polish, and how unique I was. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, because everything in me knew that what he was doing was wrong, but he was an older adult, and I could only imagine how long I would have been grounded if this guy told my father that I was rude to him. The guy started to smile, and started to comment on how pretty I was. sort of leaning towards me like he was going to touch my face, and almost an instant later, I heard my father yell louder than I've ever heard in my life before that or after. As soon as that guy heard the yelp of my father, he shrunk into himself like a sun-baked prune. I can't tell you how long we stood there as my father tore the guy a new butthole, but the man must have seen his entire disgusting life flash before his eyes. I could have sworn that he was a dead man, but I was grabbed by the arm and dragged out of the store without the groceries we came in there for. When we got out of the store, my father turned his rage towards me, screaming that I should never talk to strangers, and that I knew better than that. He kept asking why I let him get so close to me, and what I was thinking. I was so upset and ashamed that the only thing I could think of and to do was to defend my own actions by saying I didn't realize what was going on and what he was doing was bad, but that was probably just a child's attempt to get out of trouble. I've never talked to my father about what happened that day. He doesn't even know what happened to me before he found me in that aisle, and I don't think I'll ever tell him. So, to that creepy man that could have taken me in the grocery store, let's hope you're 6 feet under by now and never hurt anyone else's kids, before or after that day has happened. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night, and I'll see you next time.